Thank you so much for sticking around for this post-performance conversation. My name is Janet Schroeder. I am a scholar in residence here at Jacob's Pillow, and I am so delighted to be leading this conversation with Donovan Dorrance, Ephrat Asherie, and Michelle Dorrance. Y'all, what began as a short duet between the two of you, with music by you, is now this expanded piece with an expansive cast of performers, choreographers, composers, designers. And I want to get to all of that, but I want to begin with A Little Room, the duet that kind of started this all. And so, Ephrat, I'm wondering if you can talk about why it felt interesting or maybe even essential to deepen and expand that piece. What was it about it that made you want to continue to work in that space?
Well, hi everyone. Thanks for being such a lovely audience. Before directly answering that question, I just want to give you a little background about Michelle and our collaboration. I've had the wonderful fortune of working as a dancer in Dorrance Dance since 2014, and through our many duets on stage in Michelle's work, we have mostly improvised together. And so it was a big goal of ours to create something together that was longer than 30 seconds. So we were so excited when we made 4.5 minutes. We were like, we're killing it. Wow. And we really did make it in a tiny little room, in a dressing room, down at CSV, a space that Michelle works in very often. And then we had, I believe Brenda Buffalino, our artistic advisor, is still in the audience tonight. She came to the Joyce in 2022, and she saw that little 4.5 minute duet, and she said, that is a whole entire world. Get to work. And of course, you know, we were really excited by the fact that we had accomplished this 4.5 minutes, and we're just up for it, especially because, I don't know, very personally in our lives, we were coming out of the pandemic, we were dealing with a lot of physical pain, a lot of different kind of just like stresses of getting older as dancers, thinking about all the strife in the world. Of course, it has just continued since then, so it really felt urgent to keep making this work. And I don't know, I mean, it's really insane that it has grown from 4.5 minutes to then 25 minutes at City Center, and now here, an entire hour with the most phenomenal cast of collaborators. It is really unbelievable. Let's give it up for them.
Actually, Ephrat, that's actually my next question, Michelle. If you would maybe talk about that incredible cast of dancers and really choreographic contributors. You know, in the program, there is a long list of people represented or recognized as choreographers. So can you talk a little bit about the importance to y'all of that kind of collaborative approach to making a piece like this?
Well, I mean, I think the impetus for that conversation also exists at its root for the two of us, between the two of us, in that we were inviting each other to more deeply understand each other's language, right? And actually, I always want to shout out Derek Grant. Derek K. Grant created a show called Imagine Tap that was lived in the summer of 2006, and actually really could have lived on. You know, producers and the commercial world as opposed to the arts world is very complex and not very fair. But there was a piece, I want to credit this because it's very honestly the beginnings of this conversation physically between me and Ephrat. There was a section called The Battle of the Beats. And we were asked with accompaniment, whether it was a DJ or a kit drummer, to battle in our lane, but of course be invited into our creative improvisational spaces by being influenced by one another, right? And so I feel like that space is one that lights the both of us up. And that, like, I mean, Ephrat really is a tradition bearer of so many styles, and that I am mostly a tap dancer, of course, have an understanding of vernacular dance because of, you know, mentors and elders that have given that to us since we were young, and just that I was a teenager in the 90s, that hip hop of that era was my social dance, our social dance. There are these relationships that I'll see in other styles. And I think Ephrat feels the same. We feel the same way. We understand the roots. We understand that the Nicholas brothers were such a touchstone for early breakers. We know that there's a huge conversation that can be had, of course, with footwork and tap dance. And actually, I kind of want to hand it to Ephrat because there was a moment where she was envisioning a footwork piece with myriad footwork styles, and then we realized like that idea can live in this space. So I want to hand it to her, if you don't mind, in the midst of this conversation.
No, I had this idea for this footwork drum piece, and I was like, Michelle, will you do the music? I was like, will you just do the live percussion on stage with it? And then that didn't actually happen, but then when this came to fruit, this opportunity presented itself, we just put it all together. And it really feels like, honestly, like a beautiful extension of our friendship and our just alignment in terms of value as artists and friends. 20 years, everyone, even though we're only 25. It's hard to explain.
I'll finish to say, so when we were first thinking of expanding this work, the individuals that immediately popped into both of our minds, and I mean, we both have scraps of paper with their names on it before anyone even agreed to collaborate, to be a part of this, to step into a world where you don't know everyone in the room and not everyone is deeply familiar with each other's styles in an embodied way. Of course, in the world, for sure, every one of these practitioners and brilliant artists and singular improvisational voices and choreographers, a lot of every single person on the stage are leaders in their own community, choreographers in their own right, and of their own companies and their own work. So it's crazy that we're all in space. It's insane, A, that everyone said yes. B, that everyone was willing to contribute, but also teach each other and teach us. And in the early stages of this, we'd have short little classes, each person stepping to the front of the room to share and to help each other more deeply understand the fundamentals, just the ABCs of the languages, and to realize in those moments as you're walking through this, the relationship of your ABCs to someone else's ABCs. And I think that practice extends every time we step foot into a rehearsal, even just with honoring that we are all coming from different places, from different points of origin, from different environments in which we practice, right? And so that practice in space is something that I think we all believe is missing from so many spaces out there. And that we are doing this thing where, yes, we try each other's patience. Not everybody has the same way of doing something. And that lesson is such a lesson in, I think it's a shared humanity in this space. And I think that practice ends up in space on stage, and of course, the things that we're trying to address are present inside of that as well. But can we just have one more round of applause for every choreographer, improviser, collaborator? Yeah, it's like anyone's wildest dream to be able to dance with people who are at the top of their style and field. It's unbelievable. It's crazy.
I have one more question about the dancing before I want to shift over to the music, which is when you all were in that space together, sharing those little classes or just dancing side by side, what were some things that you learned about maybe things that they share, qualities, whether physically or even historically and culturally? What were things that you learned where they overlapped that maybe were surprising or yeah?
It's so interesting. I was literally having this thought, and then you asked the question, so thank you. So I think, of course, all these dances are part of the continuum of dances from the African diaspora and all these street and social dances, all these different regional forms. I think for us, it was really clear to see these footwork ideas exist in all these styles, but oh my goodness, the specificity of the feel, of the angle of the shoulder in relationship to the elbow, of what the head is doing in relationship to the heel. It is so specific, and it is really a beautiful thing to be in a room with artists with so much clarity. And it is humbling, because you're like, oh my gosh, wow, New York, that New York house thing is so specific too, right? For example, that's my world. And when you're around all those artists, you kind of sit in that feel, and to get out of it and move into this other, Detroit Jit, Mike Manson from Detroit, are you kidding me? I mean, right? So you're like, it really makes you, it makes you think about movement again in a beginner's mind, which is so beautiful, you know? As artists, just like we keep pushing all the time and the grind is crazy, and to be able to come back into a space where you're like, I am learning with these incredible artists. And I mean, I don't know, we are literally rehearsing before every single show. Like, we're doing notes before every show because of the level of specificity that we're asking of each other and ourselves. Yeah. I didn't quite answer your question, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
also, I just want to shout out, and I think we've all sort of pushed back against like this idea that like street dance is one umbrella, right? There's so much differentiation. Like, you saw how many different styles were on stage at the same time, right? You all saw that. You now know all about it because you went to the pre-show talk, right? That's great. Tell your friends. You know what I mean? This is part of our mission. Like, this continuum is so vast. It's so beautiful, and we're so happy to be able to share this with you.
Thank you, Ephrat. Donovan, I have a question because of this continuum of dance practices. Music is such an important partner. Like they kind of can't exist without dance. These dance practices don't necessarily exist without music. You have a very important role as the composer of the track. How did you go, what's the process of making music for something like this? How much are you like in the studio with the dancers? When do you go sit alone in a room by yourself trying to work this through? Can you just talk a little bit about how this came to be?
Absolutely. First of all, I'll just say I'm so lucky to have Michelle as my big sister. And the truth is, yeah, applause for big sisters out there in the world. The truth is, Michelle's 12 years older, and when I was born, I was just a big ball of clay, and she just molded me into, you know, to have the musical tastes and artistic desires that she has, and so our collaboration was inevitable. But also in 2014, I was able to join Dorrance Dance and meet Ephrat, and that I think was the origin of beginning to write for dance and collaborate with dancers and choreographers. And so I learned all about collaboration from these two. And honestly, it's every single show that I get to compose for is totally different. I think for this piece, it started with a little room. There was a piece that I had composed actually for another Dorrance Dance work originally, but it was sort of shelved. It was like a B-side, a little demo. And then I revisited it and and fluffed it up a little bit. And Michelle heard it and was like, "Can we use that for this duet?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." And then it just continued to snowball, I think, and so many of the pieces in this larger work started as voice notes on my phone. So sitting at the piano, having little melodic passages come to mind, recording them in a terrible way, sending them to Michelle, the two of them, deciding which are their favorite little pieces, going back, expanding those pieces, right, into larger works, and then, eventually getting to the point where I'm attending some rehearsals and then deciding to make some additional choices or adding some things based on like what some of the dancers are doing. Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting, this is the third time I've seen the show this week. I feel very lucky. But each time I see it, I hear new things. And that has been a thrill to me. And so, like a follow-up question I have, what I realized is really exciting is when the live percussionist is like collaborating with or like in real time playing with your composition. And I'd love for you to talk a bit more about that, like composing for dance, but also to be played alongside with by live music.
John Angeles is one beast of a mofo. Unbelievable. Big round of applause for John. John and Michelle go way back to their days in Stomp. You can talk more about John if you want to. But I guess what I'll say is the most sophisticated and incredible piece of music in this show is the music that the three of them, Michelle, Fritz, and John, are making on the table stage left. Unreal. Michelle says it didn't go as well as she wanted tonight, and my jaw was on the floor while I was watching it. I could never write something like that, let alone perform anything like that. So big ups to the three of them for doing that. Do you want to talk a little bit about John?
Yeah, I think the thing to know, I mean, first of all, I should also say this. So someone we call Professor Hector, Fritzlin Hector, who is a brilliant artist in this work, a choreographic contributor, improvisational dancer, and really like a spirit to me inside of this work that we so need. She also had the opportunity to teach the school yesterday, and it was incredibly uplifting, and I do believe something she taught in that one class might end up on the outdoor stage if you're going tomorrow to see the school. Yeah, I know, I probably shouldn't have said that, but it's a small group of people, don't tell anyone. Anyway, I mentioned Fritz to say that Fritzlin trained me and John in Stomp. So we're on stage with our teacher, which is incredible for the two of us. And then the other thing I'll say about John is, way before any of that, before Stomp, et cetera, he's a world champion snare drummer. He was a part of the Cavaliers. So he's literally one of the best snare drummers in the world. Now, he would tell you now he doesn't have enough time to practice. He has twin 1-year-old girls and a 3-year-old boy, and he's still one of the most exceptional percussionists I know. And he plays Donovan's compositions percussively and then has his own snare drum compositions also inside of this work. And intersecting that also level of precision for me is such a gift to be able to, and also he has a force, I mean, that we were trained together, we were sort of like siblings as we entered Stomp, which is something that requires such a detailed, ear, and an understanding of momentum that is built by a group. And that won't always be precise, but there's something inside of it that's more important. And that, I think, is another thing that we're after in this, in that everyone, by the end, is a percussive musician. And that even before we entered a room together, to us, everyone was percussive, whether it was heard. Everyone had the visual specificity, like Ephrat was saying before, and a deep musicality. There is no one on this stage that isn't a brilliant, to me, musician. And I think to be invited into Donovan's world, and sometimes like a lot of these dance forms and a lot of our grooves sit in a 4/4 more naturally, to push that into a 7, to push that feel into these shifting or metric modulating ideas, it was both a challenge and my gosh was it exciting to watch. Like everyone in their own lane enter a new space, make different choices with the way they shift their weight, because the turn of the phrase is one count shorter or one later. And what came of it is such unbelievable expression. I mean, it's unreal what everyone in this show has done to more deeply understand and embody the music.
So we are very nearly out of time. I'm going to ask one more question, but before I do, I want to invite you all tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. in Blake's Barn. We will continue this conversation as part of a pillow talk. So if you haven't heard enough after this last question, please join us. My last question for y'all, this piece is it's quite innovative. It's new. But there's a really important aspect of history and legacy in the piece, and honoring those histories and legacies, including, I love the artistic advisors listed in the program who have contributed to this, and I wonder if we could end this conversation about the importance of those advisors and the past as it impacts the way you're thinking about dance today and going forward.
Well, Buddha Stretch, who was our other advisor with Brenda Buffalino, is the reason that Michelle and I were roommates on that show by Derek Grant, Imagine Tat. He was the choreographer of the hip-hop sections in the work. So he plays Papa Stretch, he plays a really big role in my story and how we really became connected. And so he spawned this collaboration in many ways. I really feel the presence of my elders with me. Like today matinee, I was really thinking about some of our elders that are not here with us, and I'd like to say their names because there's my big sister in dance, Marjorie Smarth. There is a beautiful interview with her here in the archives that I have never seen before until I was here. She's no longer with us. I feel her presence on the stage. Sorry.
Yeah, no, because of Ephrat and because also of Brian Green, one of our younger elders, I was invited into a space with house dance. And so I don't just honor our tap dance elders here in this space, I honor Marge as well, because Brian Green would bring tap dancers into the house dance conference in the early 2000s, and we would perform in a club. They'd stop the music and lights would come up, and we were like, this is so awkward. He was like, it is so important to keep the cultures and our histories connected. And that we so deeply believe in this is really important. And so Marge was a touchstone for me and is really one of the only people that I actually studied regularly with as a novice house dancer. I mean, but you never stopped moving. There's so many legacies that are alive on stage. Go ahead, sorry.
No, sorry, but yeah, Marge used to teach at Faisal's Dance Studio in New York City, which is the place where all of us non-ballet and modern dancers would go. Percussive dancers, street dancers, right? So we also would see each other, and literally those were sacred floors. It was where the copacetics got down to, right? And so we're also talking about other elders in my community that are now in their 60s and 70s, Bravo, Archie, right? They always talk about tap dancers as big inspirations for them. So like this whole story of all of us feels like a continuation of, a story that changed all of our lives. And I also really want to shout out Brian Green for making that connection, because legendary hip hop and house dancer, but also West African dancer and pretty wonderful tap dancer, right? He used to bring the tap dancers to this event called the House Dance Conference. He valued musicality so much. When he would have battles, if you were battling and you were not listening to the music, he would turn off the music. He'd be like, why is this even on? You're clearly not connecting here. And you would just shut it down, right? So we're talking about that level of like, he was working for us to understand how we're connected. What are these stories? What are these musical histories that are bringing us together?
And I just want to follow up by saying, Ephrat mentioned the copacetics, mentioned Faisal's, and Brenda Buffalino is not only an innovative artist and choreographer and composer and author in her own right. She also bears a tradition that has a relationship to Honey Cole's legacy and the legacy of the copacetics. So like these spaces that were occupied by so many folks, Brenda being a direct artistic advisor, but also just someone that I think of. So the idea of bringing, a spirit or an ancestor or someone that has taught you into space, whenever I realize I'm not investigating enough, I don't have enough sensitivity with which I'm approaching something, all I need to do is think of Brenda. There's a moment where I'm doing some slide work, which I could think of Jimmy, and then actually there's this one moment where I think of Diane taught me the Leanne Collins slide routine, and I'm like, I know what I would like to do here. And it's almost always filtered through a woman that I know. These two women are alive today, and I think of my touch on the floor with more care, also because of my mentor, Gene Medler, but he introduced me to these two women. But yeah, I think we are at our best when we remember what we've been invited to do and taught to do and empowered to do by those legends who we were so lucky to have as teachers and as folks that inspired us.
Thank you. On that note, thank you all so much for sticking around, listening to this talk. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.